Addressing the Israeli parliament, spoke for the better part of an hour, had some high praise for his special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, along with his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, for brokering that deal. Some harsh words as well for prior administrations. But yes, an historic moment in the Middle East. All 20 living hostages have been released by Hamas. So the big question at this point, could this actually lead to a permanent end to the Israel-Hamas war? Joining us to discuss that question and react to the speech, Cecile Shea with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Cecile, as always, thank you so much for being here. Let me start off by asking you what you thought of the speech just there.
Well, you know, he's clearly very happy with what has been accomplished in the Middle East. And one of the things that will be interesting to watch is whether this changes his understanding of why the U.S. historically has been so involved in foreign policy. If there's one thing that we've seen in the last 2 weeks, it's that whether or not this administration wants to be, the U.S. is still the essential country. This agreement would not have been possible without pressure directly from the president, both on Hamas and on Israel, as well as guarantees from the president to both Hamas and Israel. So whether this somehow changes part of the tack of the administration will be interesting to see. But what is clear is that the president has made significant commitments to both sides to make this ceasefire work. And now he's going to have to stick up to those commitments. And one of the things that has to happen quickly is Israel needs to pull back, and both sides need to commit to not responding to individual attacks that almost certainly are going to happen, kind of lone wolf attacks in the next few weeks. And both sides are going to have to show a lot of composure and responsibility and not responding to those so that we can move to the next phase of this plan.
You mentioned pressure as a key factor that led to this ceasefire. How important of a factor was the erosion of public support for Israel's military campaign? For example, you know, we saw all these major nations recognizing a Palestinian state. We had a number of global leaders walk out on Benjamin Netanyahu at the UN. How important was that as a factor in getting here as well?
Well, one of the things that has surprised me over the last 2 years is the way that my very left-wing Israeli friends even have kind of been in denial about the way that Israel's reputation has fallen so significantly, particularly in the U.S. Because if there is one country in the world that Israel needs, it is the U.S. And when I would talk about these things, people were so wrapped up in what was going on in their own country that they weren't paying, if I could add this commentary, enough attention to what was happening to Israel's reputation around the world. I do think that is starting to sink in a bit, but ultimately, I think that really what pushed Israel over was President Trump being very angry after they attacked Qatar and saying to Netanyahu, that's it, I'm tired of this, we need an agreement. And then what we've learned this morning is that a week ago, when Hamas was still resisting the agreement, a personal promise from President Trump that he would not allow Israel to restart the war. It was only a personal face-to-face meeting between President Trump's representatives and Hamas that allowed this agreement to go forward. And so what that means is now the U.S. is on the hook. The U.S. has promised that Israel will not restart the war against Hamas. So there's going to have to be significant pressure on Netanyahu to make sure that does not happen.
I want to ask you a little more about Qatar in just a second, but one thing you mentioned these two sides need to right now both show restraint in the near term especially. Then there's the larger question of who governs Gaza and what is left of Gaza at this point. Can you provide any insight into those questions?
So there has been an idea in Israel for 2 years now that has now been adopted by portions of the administration that some of the Gulf states should move into Gaza and help to establish some sort of non-Hamas government. I confess I have some concerns about that because I served in countries where I saw what Saudi involvement did, particularly in the school system, to fostering extremism in those countries. So we need to really ask ourselves, do we really want some of these countries involved in rebuilding Gaza? I'm not sure. Of course, we no longer have an organization that can really help with that. USAID is out of business. We could restart something. but I would like to see something a little broader. But clearly, we need a non-Hamas, non-Muslim Brotherhood government established in Gaza as quickly as possible, as well as massive amounts of help to rebuild the infrastructure there, to educate the children who haven't been in school for 2 years, to provide medical care because the hospitals have been destroyed, and to give some hope to those people. So yes, there's a big job ahead of us, and I agree with you completely. Forming some sort of governing body that can eventually become a government and then eventually join with the West Bank and become a country. That's going to be the big project for the next year or two.
One more question before we let you go, Cecile. You mentioned there was that window after that kind of bungled strike by Israel in Qatar. Over the weekend, we heard that they're going to have some kind of military presence, the Qatari government, in the state of Utah. Can you provide any insight into kind of the dynamic at play between the U.S. and Qatar right now?
Yeah, it's a little bit mysterious to me, but I do have one theory, and it's just a theory. So we have members of foreign militaries training in the U.S. pretty rarely. They're usually from NATO. So we'll have an air group here, sometimes for a year, or we'll have more likely individual pilots here. We obviously educate large numbers of military leaders from around the world at any given time. We have hundreds of them studying in the U.S. For the Qatar to send part of its Air Force here to train, well, part of that is that we have room to train. And what all militaries in the Middle East, except perhaps for the Saudis, need is room to go supersonic and train. Israel used to train over Turkey, and then that kind of fell away. So they train other places now. So my theory is maybe the Qataris are just looking for a little more airspace so that their pilots can really make full use of these amazing modern planes that they are purchasing, and that, you know, require space if you're going to really go to Mach 1 and maneuver in them. I don't know if that's true, or if it's just a matter of wanting to give the Qataris a little bit of face. It does make sense for them to train with us. Remember, we have a huge part of the U.S. Navy in Qatar, and in Bahrain. So it makes sense for them to train with the U.S. And so this may be face-saving, or maybe a slightly more permanent arrangement to give them a little space to train in.
Okay, that's good. That's interesting. Good perspective. Cecile Shea, thank you as always for your perspective. We really appreciate your time this morning.
My pleasure to be here on this great day, and good morning.
Okay, good morning to you.